Hey everybody, Crow back again, and what you're looking at here is the third pinball controller that I've built. Yeah, this is revision 3, I guess. I built this one completely from scratch. I have videos up on the first two that I built, but just briefly, I built the first one in 2019, and I built the second one in 2022, and I actually used all the parts from the first one. I put them inside the second one. But this third one that I built, it's using all completely new parts. I did film a lot of the process of me building it, and this isn't going to be a how-to video or anything. I'm just making this video just to show what I did and talk about the reason I built it the way I did. But right now, I'm just going to jump into the footage and comment over that. All right, to start out with, I've got some material here I bought while I was at Menards. I got the edge glued pine. I kind of guessed at the amount I was gonna need. Here's some paint. I got some wood filler, just some just basic stuff here. The rest of this footage is going to be sped up. Now, this is the stuff I bought from VirtuaPin. There's actually two kits that I bought. The first is the digital plunger kit version 4. This was $169.95. It came with the plunger. It came with everything you see here, a bunch of the boards and everything. I also bought this button kit, which is what you're looking at now. And this is kind of just like all the buttons you would need. Most of the buttons light up. The flipper buttons obviously don't light up. But on the board, there's no way to provide the voltage to light them up. It didn't really matter to me. I just needed the buttons. And I thought that just buying this combo package was a good idea. So now here we got, I'm just starting to cut the wood. When I bought all this material, I didn't really have a plan in place. I didn't know how much space I was going to need. I actually bought the wood before I got the encoder board, the VirtuaPin encoder board and everything. So I just was like, oh, I guess I need this much wood. I also had scrap wood. All the other controllers I had made were pretty much from scrap wood. This was the first one I'm building using actual wood that I bought specifically for this. Now, an actual cabinet would be using like plywood, but I just figured I'd go with this. It actually isn't that expensive what I bought. I think those two pieces of wood combined was about like $15, maybe $18. So not that expensive at all. And then when I started to build it, I just was like, okay, I'm going to guess I need this much. I'm going to guess I need this wide. I did buy an old lockdown bar from the Pinball Expo when I went there. It was somewhere around $30, $35 or something like that. So that's basically going to tell me how wide I need to make it. So basically I've cut the few pieces here. I've glued them together. Now I'm nailing in the sides there. It's actually the bottom and the front and the back. I had it's like a 12-degree angle. I looked up, what kind of angle, is kind of typical for a pinball machine. So it's 12 degrees. So I kind of made that a 12-degree angle. This was the hard part. This is actually the top part. And the lockdown bar actually has the pieces of metal sticking down from it. And the last one I did, I actually cut those pieces of metal off the lockdown bar. This time I figured it'd be easier to cut the wood with, and that was kind of tough because, with the jigsaw and everything, it didn't need to be perfect because it was going to get covered up. What I'm cutting here is the side rails. Now this again was just a piece of angled metal I bought from Menards. Again, not that expensive. I had more than enough for $7. And I basically had painted the side rails and the lockdown bar with black textured, like almost like a powder coat paint to kind of make it feel like a modern Stern or even the At Games Legends pinball. Now, what I'm doing here, these are the side buttons. Now, these flipper buttons that I got, they are actual pinball flipper buttons. They're not like regular arcade buttons. They use leaf switches, and I'll kind of show that a little bit closer when going into it. But the holes, you don't just drill one hole. You have to drill a bigger hole and then a smaller hole. But the bigger hole is only a little bit in there, so it kind of inserts in there. What I'm doing there is on the inside, I'm also doing an indent here for the leaf switches. And the reason I did that is because if I didn't do that, the leaf switch would have too much play on it. I'll kind of point out why I need to do that with the leaf switches. Now, I just kind of filmed just one coating. I would come out here every so often and put another coat on. It was probably at least 3 coats of paint that I put on here, and I just wanted to pick a color that was different from the previous ones that I've done, and also something that was interesting. 3D printed that stencil, and I used that silver paint just for the stencils. On the front there is a stencil of Crow T Robot from Mystery Science Theater 3000, and that's really all I could think of. And then I'm putting a clear coat on there and then screwing on some feet on the bottom there. Now I'm gluing the sidebars on. When you saw me doing the angle, that was just because the ends of them hung down lower than the lockdown bar. And I'm just kind of gluing that stick of wood because I had to drill out the front part of it to allow the lock bar to be able to go through there. So now I'm just kind of gluing that in there. Now I could bring it inside, and I have this open from the top just so it'd be easier to work on. The other ones that I built, I basically had screws in the bottom. I had to unscrew the bottom and to open up and to get inside there whenever I needed to make any sort of changes. But since this one is different and I might need to actually get inside of it more frequently, I was just going to use regular hinges on the outside, but these are like hidden hinges. It caused a little bit of a problem because I did have it at an angle and these were meant to be 90 degrees. So I did kind of indent in a little bit more of the wood there. So it would kind of face more forward. And this is just the assembly of the plunger here. You can kind of see how it goes together. It's using infrared light. There I am putting in the flipper buttons. And I'm just kind of testing to make sure that they're not too close to the leaf switches. So yeah, I just want to get the buttons in there and see what it all look like. And yeah, this was trying to get the lid on it, the top part on it, trying to get it in the right position. That it actually was tougher than I thought it would be. Okay, yeah, and then I also put in a magnet so when it is closed, the hinge actually is doing a really good job of keeping it closed when it's closed, but I also added that magnet for as an extra there. I also put in a couple blocks of wood because when I was reading the instructions on that board, it said that as close to the front as possible and as high up as possible was best. So, oh, I could put a couple blocks of wood there and make it go up higher. I don't know if you caught it, but I did during one of those jump cuts, I did rotate it around 180 degrees just so the plug on it would go in the back. The buttons, again, not perfect, but whatever. It's not like I'll be using those buttons in a action game situation. Those are just really for things like camera adjustments and, going through menus, whatnot. I didn't film any of wiring that in because it was like, I didn't know how long it was going to take. And I kind of started it and I redid it. But I think that's about the end of the footage coming up here. Yep, that's it. All right, so here we have the controller all finished. Got the basically it's the same buttons on this side. So again, we've got the regular flipper button. I put in a secondary flipper button if that could ever come into use someday. This would be a nudge button, although it's not really necessary. The reason I use this button specifically is because it's convexed instead of concaved, and it's when I'm hitting it, it's easier just to hit it with my palm if I ever wanted to do that. But usually it wouldn't really be that necessary. And again, wouldn't have normally put these buttons in here to start or add coin buttons, but it was part of that kit that I got, and I had plenty of space on the board for these kind of buttons. So I figured I'd just put them in there, even though I might not ever use them. There's the I was looking for a stencil and I was like, I could 3D print and put on here. And I was like, you know what, that's good. And I was thinking about adding more of the silver paint to it. But I was like, I can't really think of a good idea. So I just left it as is. The ball launch button again. Acts just like the A button on a regular controller, or like again the enter button on a keyboard. Here's our plunger. Normally there would be a spring here, but I replaced that with this piece I 3D printed specifically for that, and a little bit of padding. It's a little bit louder. That there's a reason I replaced the spring that was on here with this, and I'll get to that a little bit later in the video. On top here, I posted a picture on this on my community page, and somebody mentioned, oh, it's like an all-round purpose controller because, got the joystick here and 6 buttons, but that's not really the intent. And they were also saying like, oh, if I'm playing it, don't these buttons get in the way? No, 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 not at all. Actually, I put them where they are. So specifically, they'd be really close and I could reach over and just hit them whenever I needed to without really moving my hands. This button on this side specifically, I put in there because Pinball FX and Pinball M have certain game modes where you can activate power-ups, and that's meant to be the power-up activation button. On this side, it's just because I'm a bit lazy, and this is like a ball launch button. I did that on my previous controller as well. I put the ball launch button here instead of on the front. So basically this, yeah, functionally is the same thing as this, but the advantage to this is I don't have to move my hand to launch the button. And it really comes in handy for something like High Speed 2 to Getaway, where you have to shift gears, and that way you can shift gears without moving your hands. These buttons, I didn't really do a good job of spacing them apart, but these are just general buttons. Now the red one, I set up like the B button, like to go back. This one again is like the enter to go forward or start maybe. By hitting this, it's like hitting up on the right analog stick. And so if you want to look at the back box, when you can do that in Pinball FX, you can hold this button down and it'll move the camera up. I'm using this one to change the camera angle. I'm using this one to the enhancements on or off, both the Williams tables. And I'm using this one, snap a screenshot button. Let's see if I can open this up with one hand. I don't think I can, actually. Let me see. For now, I got both hands free, and I can open this up. And we can take a look on the inside. I purposely put a four-way gate on it. That is, you can only go up, down, left, or right. You can't do any diagonals because the joystick would only really be used for menus, not really any games, although it'd be perfect for something like Pac-Man, I guess, if I really wanted to play Pac-Man with this thing. My original intention was to just have buttons like I did on my previous ones for up, down, left, or right. In fact, I even bought replacement buttons. And then at the last minute, I was thinking, you know what, maybe a joystick really wouldn't be that bad. I got tons of leftover joysticks. And you can see for the brackets here, you can see my crude job of indenting them and making the thing positioned with washers at the right angle so you could get it down. Oh, I didn't point out the one thing here. I close this back up here. Because I wasn't expecting to use those hinges. If you look at the back here, it's kind of not flush, and I needed that. So when I open this up, it actually has space to open up. But here is the virtual pin board, and this is it powered by USB-C. All the wires coming into this board, all you need to do is like take a little screwdriver or something like that, push down on here and just kind of insert these cables in, and they're nice and snug. This board here came with this fantastic Turbo 2000 professional indicator. And the interesting thing is this mount here, this is not the mount that came with the kit. The mount that they had originally sent with this was really so you could put it upwards against something, like you see it through a pane or a hole or something. And that's not how I was going to use this. So I actually made my own kind of mount for it. And it's kind of sandwiched in between two pieces here. So I could mount it to the back wall. So if you pull the plunger, you could see exactly how much you're putting on it. So now the reason why I replaced the spring was because with the spring on here, when I would launch it, the plunge would shoot forward and then kind of bounce back and forth a little bit. And that was causing it to do something like this in slow motion. So it would go boing, 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 boing like that. And I guess the polling or the reading of the game isn't as fast as this actually moves. So it was causing some plunges not to work properly. So I replaced the spring with, just something more solid that wouldn't bounce, so it actually will work properly. Talking about the leaf switches, so this is what I'm talking about when they're, like I say, they're not like normal arcade buttons. These leaf switches are built a little bit differently, the pinball switches. It may look like it's touching now, but it's not. You actually have to tap the button to touch it. And that's why I needed to make this indent here, because without it, this would be out further. And because of that, it would actually there'd be more space of this button touching this leaf switch, and kind of want it to be resting on it, but not pressing it. So when you do tap the button even just a little bit, it activates the flapper. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up with this board in particular is it did not, absolutely did not like being plugged into a USB hub. I absolutely had to plug this directly into my computer, plugged into a hub like I normally would have any other controller. It just would not read it properly. It would connect, disconnect, go crazy, and forget about running the software that would be needed to configure this. And I figured now would be a good time to segue into that. All right, so what I have up here is the VirtuaPin Plunger configuration utility, and it's connected now. But even with it connected to the computer, I does have sometimes a problem actually connecting to the VirtuaPin. But what I found is there's a little button, reset button on the device itself. I was unplugging and plugging in the USB, and sometimes I have to do that a couple times before I would recognize it. And then I realized, oh, by hitting that button, it would recognize it right after I hit the button every single time. We have a calibration. Now, these calibration numbers aren't right, but that's not what's programmed into the thing right there. But if I wanted to calibrate it, which I'm not going to do because it took me a while to get it calibrated, I'd hit the calibrate button and then I'd just pull out the plunger and it would tell me to release and then push it in. And that would be what I had the hard time doing because there's really not much room to push it in here because I don't have the spring in here. But I managed to get it working. The VirtuaPin board actually has two different modes. It's got a keyboard mode and a gamepad mode. Now, if you have it in gamepad mode, Windows still sees it as VirtuaPin, but it kind of reconfigures it differently where the joystick is the D-pad. But I have it set on keyboard mode because not only can you, if I go over to the next page, the key assignments, can you assign everything to a separate key, but it also will detect this as a gamepad as well. It said that the gamepad mode is really for like things like PinballFX, and that's true, it will work for PinballFX, but then a lot of the buttons that I have on here won't do anything because they're really assigned for keyboard keys. Whereas if I have it in keyboard mode, not only will it detect it as a key press, but it will also detect it as a gamepad press as well. The interesting thing is that there's batch files that this came with, where if you modify those batch files with the COM port that your device is plugged into, as you can see up here, it's in port 7 on my computer. So you go into the batch file, modify those to port 7, and then you could just run those batch files and it'll reconfigure the controller to keyboard or gamepad mode. It can turn on or off the plunger, on or off the accelerometer. And they did that so you can have just automated scripts running. So if you were to run one program, it can set the controller up automatically as long as you put that as part of your script. And then if you go back to something like Pinball FX 3, you can have it reconfigured again. With Windows, this is how it sees it. It sees it as VirtuaPin. If we go to properties, the buttons, yeah. So you can see the plunger. It's the interesting thing, and I totally forgot about this, and that's kind of one of the reasons why my previous controllers were keyboard controllers instead of joystick controllers, is because, especially with the plunger setup, and I realized this with the At Games Legends Pinball, the computer sees this as the Z-axis. I really don't know why they have these set up for Z-axis. I'm sure there's a reason for it. But the problem is that on your joypad, when you're playing it, something like PinballFX expects to see your plunger as the right analog stick, which would be the Y-axis. So it doesn't, without doing any sort of modification, PinballFX will not see this at all. Now, if we look at the XY axis there, that would be the actual shaking. So we could see if I'm shaking this left and right and everything, you could see that that's moving there. And again, we got the buttons, do that. The interesting thing, this is in keyboard mode. So when we move the joystick, it's going to see it as button pushes. But if I did have this in joystick mode, it would actually change that to the hat. So now I'm going to bring up some stuff in Steam. Now in Steam, for whatever reason, it's seeing it as two things. One of them is the right one and one of them is not. So in Steam, if I go into the Steam settings in controller and I pick the right one, then I can bring up this test here, and so we can see that the left joystick, and then by pulling the plunger, it's actually doing the right analog stick. And that's because when I went through the setup input devices, I actually, when it went through and it told me to push down, that's when I would pull the lever there. So instead of being the trigger, that this is now the analog stick. Now, another adjustment I was messing around with, but I really didn't need to at this point. I do have this layout that I created, VirtuaPin adjusted. It turns out I didn't really need to adjust anything now. But what I was doing when I still had the spring attached, I would go into right joystick behavior and I would select the dead zone. And right now there is no dead zone, but I found by having a pretty big dead zone in the middle, that was actually solving my problem. But the problem is that the plunger wouldn't actually work until I had it more than halfway across. So yeah, you can see that working good enough. But yeah, when I wanted to fix that issue, I was like doing something like this. I was messing around with this a lot, but it's not really necessary with this modification that I've made here. So yeah, if you can see that there's like no bounce back. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other solution for that. I mean, I don't like the noise that it makes when I do that, but it works. So yeah, I just booted up Pinball FX here. Should be able to hit any key. And the table I was actually testing this out with was Creature from the Black Lagoon. It was what I just played. And I was just really testing launching balls and stuff. So yeah, we could just get in there. And again, I could have pushed here again, if you wanted to do like the normal button push, if you didn't have an analog controller, yeah, you could see that that still works. And then this will work. So you could see that it's actually pretty good. It feels way better than it does on the At Games Legends Pinball, to be honest. Even the 4K one, I mean, it's a much smoother. Although back, let go. And if we hit the blue button, oh yeah, at the ball launch, it goes up and you could get a better idea of what you want to go for. So let's go like a little bit like that. And almost. But then here, when it's after it gets past there, we can look up at the back box. And again, enhancements on, enhancements off, camera angles. I usually just go with camera number 2 here. Also, yeah, again, the nudging it, you can see that. And again, that's the sensitivity of that is something there we go, I built it, is something I can adjust as well, whether or not be through the VirtuaPin program or through the seam sensors as well. But just one more thing, just take a look at this. I mean, this is the flipper button. Just how sensitive that is. I'm barely touching it and it flips. But yeah, this is working out pretty good. This is working fantastic. Now normally I wouldn't have this up on my desk while I'm playing. I have a little end table. It's a really junky end table, really flimsy, which is perfect because then when I nudge it, it's easier to nudge because it wobbles a lot. But I might build something for this to specifically sit on. That'll be more this size. But yeah, I'll put that end table be slightly under my desk so it's more comfortable to play it while I'm sitting. Guess I could put this on my desk and stand and play it. Would work just as well. But yeah, just wanted to make this video showing the controller I'll be using from now on. The other thing I should kind of point out is, again, on the back here, we didn't really see the back but before, but again, if I unplug this here, I put these little rubber feet you kind of see there, because if I were to store this somewhere, I'd want to store it on this end, just like this, and that way I could have it sitting upward and it taking up less floor space. Anyway, I'll just end it here. Thanks for watching. See y'all next time.